I'm Rick Dior, and today we're going to talk about the old, great K Zildjian cymbals. I've gotten a lot of emails and questions from you guys online. Thank you so much. A lot of them are about cymbals, so we're going to address that today. This is also for all of my students who are always asking me about the old Ks, and so I took them out and set them up. These are my favorites. These are the ones I use for playing gigs and recording. And I don't take them out a lot because, you know, obviously a little worried about them, but these are the really good ones that I own. I own about 20 Ks. Again, the original Ks made up until the early 1960s. And then after that, you know, you had the Canadian K and then the newer K. Those aren't the same thing. So these particular cymbals, the sizes are, this is a 21 and a half, kind of a strange size. This is an 18, and this is a 16. And these are almost 14-inch hi-hats, about 13 and 7/8. So back in the day, the measurements weren't as perfect as they are now. So it's not uncommon to find old Ks that are not exactly 20 inches, 22s, and all that. Like I said, this is closer to a 21 and a half. So the ride cymbals are the most prized of the old Ks. This particular one, I'll tell you a quick story. I found it, I was playing a rock gig 30 some odd years ago, and there was a band on before us, and I saw this cymbal. He was riding on it. It was a crash cymbal, but he was using it as a crash cymbal, but he was riding on it like this. But the way it was moving, which is that wavy motion, told me right away what it was, because I had grown up watching, you know, Tony Williams and Elvin Jones and Mel Lewis, and I knew that look, and that's got to be an old K. So after the set, I went up to him, real nice guy, and I said, "Hey man, can I see that cymbal?" And he said, yeah. And then I said, "Well, where'd you get it?" And he's like, "Oh, I got it from my grandfather. He was a drummer." And I'm like, "Okay." And I said, "Well, do you play jazz stuff?" He goes, "Oh, no, I just, you know, I play in this rock band." And I think he was a UPS guy. He was a delivery guy. And so I said, "Well, you know, man, that's a really, really nice cymbal, and, you know, let me offer you some money for it." And after a little bit of negotiation and an undisclosed sum of money, I owned this cymbal, which is pretty much the best old K ride I have. I have several, but this is my favorite for recording. And then this is so this ride I figure is from the 40s, the 1940s. This crash is the most recent of the Ks I own. It's from the 60s, and it's a little more perfect. It's exactly 16 inches. I think by then, you know, the process was much more, much less slowly handmade, and almost just a quicker, turning out more cymbals. And this particular cymbal is in the middle of these two. This is from the 1950s. This is an old 18, a really nice, bright cymbal. That's great ride cymbal. You'll see these rivets in here. I don't know if you can see that, but what happens when I purchased this cymbal at a pawn shop in New York with a bunch of other stuff, it had a crack in it. So what I did was I went home and I drilled that crack on either side and in the middle and put rivets in it. And then I filed that crack out, which is something you can do with an old K, all the way to its end. And literally, I've had this cymbal for over 30 years at least, I think, and it has not cracked. And I use it just about every day. So that works if you ever find a K with a crack. The hardest cracks to fix are the edge cracks. They are fixable, but they will spread fast. This is a rare middle crack. Don't know how that happened, but my guess is something fell on it. So, and these Ks will crack very easily because the brass, bronze, whatever mixture, secret mixture it is, is very soft. So they're very fragile. You got to be very careful how you play them. Always use cymbal sleeves. You'll see on this K and several Ks that you'll find will be keyholed. Holding occurs when you use a cymbal without a cymbal sleeve. This long part here is called the cymbal sleeve. Always use those on all your cymbals, but especially the Ks. So you see that keyholing there. Hopefully you can see it. It's called keyholing because it's like an old skeleton key for the old door locks. It looks very similar to that. So when I got this cymbal from that guy, this cymbal had a crack and a keyhole here. And what I did, again, I went home. I have a set of nice, very small files I use for these old cymbals. And I filed that out and haven't had a problem with it, ever. It hasn't spread. So this was from him using it on a cymbal stand without any kind of protection, any kind of cymbal sleeve at all. Now, while I have it off, I'll show you a few things that are interesting. So this is, like I said, my oldest K. It's from between the 40s and 50s. It has a medium stamp on there, which I find hilarious. So whatever that was, or if it was put on later, I don't know. It's got the signature on there, which is indecipherable, but an expert would know. This is different than the other signatures I have. Obviously, the signature of the person who made it, or his boss. And it also has remnants of the old white sticker that would come on these Ks. When I was a kid, I lived in Brooklyn, and near Williamsburg, there was a bridge, and if you went over that bridge, Williamsburg Bridge, you'd see the old Gretsch factory. They closed down a long time ago, but they distributed these old Ks, and if you were a Zildjian endorser, which obviously I wasn't at the time because I was, 10 years old, you could go into that Zildjian factory and pick out from piles of cymbals. And they had these white stickers. That sticker is no longer on there. It's worn off, but you see where it was. So one thing that's important is I really believe in do not ever clean these cymbals. In other words, don't use brass clean or brasso, anything on them. Part of their charm and great sound is age. And with that age comes dirt, and with that dirt comes articulation, dryness, character. So don't clean them. Also, don't bury them either. Some people, when I was growing up, they say, "Oh yeah, you got to bury your cymbals," and I always thought that was a joke. And my teacher Joe Morello told me it was a joke too, so I tend to believe that. You don't want to bury your cymbals. Worst case scenario, you'd forget where you buried it. Best case scenario, you dig it up and it looks like hell. It's got green moss and mold all over it, and of course then you're not going to want to clean it, and it probably is going to smell pretty bad too. So please don't do that. Okay. This cymbal, we'll take this off. This also has some old keyholing. Again, this is the 18, and not as bad, but it did have a crack, and I took that out. You see it. So it was cracked. And you see here where I put the rivets, it has a little bit of a gouge out of the edge where probably whoever used it kept it in a trap case without a cymbal bag. And just, that's very common on these cymbals. The edges are really worn out because people just threw them around like they were nothing. Little did they know, right? And then this also has the remnants of the sticker telling me it came out of that Gretsch factory. And it does not have, well, it does have a signature. You could barely read it. So it looks like at one point someone tried to clean this cymbal, unfortunately. But I know it's been over 30 years since it's been cleaned because I've owned it that long. Now, a lot of these 18s were made for piatti, or in other words, crash cymbals for marching band and or orchestra. And they're heavier, on the heavier side. So you'll find a lot of the 18s are heavier than the 20s. A good weight for a 20 or 21, 22, 2,000 grams and above. So between 2,000 grams and 2,500 grams are a decent weight you should be looking at. So if you're going shopping for a K, if you want to bring your scale, you can do that. One little word of advice: never buy a K online unless you can play it first or return it. Most of the Ks made were bad. I've played over 100 Ks, and probably only 10% of those were really good. And all my teachers and all the guys I grew up with hanging out in New York who were older and lived through that era told me that a lot of them were really bad. And when they went to the factory, they would spend hours and hours picking through them, finding ones that were good. Now you might say, what made them good and what makes them good? Well, the first thing that makes them bad is a hum. And a hum occurs when you play the cymbal, and over a short period of time, that ringing builds up into an actual pitch, which is deadly for any kind of recording. A little less noticeable live, but it will annoy the hell out of you and probably the musicians around you. And I call those cymbals hummers. Stay away from hummers. There were a lot of those that I've played and that I've heard. So that's a no-go. A lot of times I'll have sound files online for old Ks. That's not always the best way because it depends on the microphone. The mic I'm using today is an old AKG C, which is a mic from the 1950s and 60s. And it's pretty accurate. It's a great drum overhead mic, great piano mic, but I think it's a very accurate mic as far as cymbals go. What you see is what you get. It's very pretty up top. It's not shrill, so that's what you'll be hearing today. And that's the only mic that I'm using to record today. The other great thing about these cymbals, and one thing to look out for, is the bell. It's a pretty prized part of the old K Zildjians. So that's just a beautiful sound. It blends with anything, and it never gets annoying. Like most cymbal bells can really become annoying. Now, I wouldn't use it for a rock, gig. It wouldn't be loud enough. It wouldn't penetrate. But for jazz, it's the thing. And if you want to hear great examples on record, listen to McCoy Tyner record, The Real McCoy. There's a tune on there called Passion Dance. That's Elvin Jones. And, he goes into this little mambo groove in the bridge of that tune. And it's just a beautiful sound. And of course, Elvin Jones, Tony Williams, Mel Lewis, lots of other drummers from that era were just always used Ks, always used the old Ks, and that's their sound. It's part of their sound. Other than their brilliance as players, that sound, that cymbal sound was them. And several of them used the same cymbals mostly their whole career, particularly Tony Williams, as is well documented. So the bell on this 18 is much drier and much higher. These 18s tended to have much higher in actual dimension and pitch. So that's a nice little contrast. As opposed to... So if you have a good 22, 20, whatever, and an 18, that's a great cymbal combination. And all your cymbals in jazz, I believe, and lots of other great drummers believe, should be crashes and rides. You should be able to ride on any cymbal that you're using as a jazz player. So crashing and riding. Now this 18 has a little bit of a hum. You can hear it. And you can really hear it here. So that's common for the 18s that are a little heavier. So just stay away from that part of the cymbal. if you play on this part of the cymbal, kind of the bow right here, close to the edge, you won't hear that, okay? Or hardly at all. So that's the thing when you're buying one of these. The other thing, look around really carefully around the cymbal, underneath the cymbal, even with a magnifying glass for cracks. Some people call them fissures. They could be very, very slight. If they're less than a ½ inch, you can take them out, no problems. If they're on the bell of the cymbal, in other words, where the cymbal, the hole, where it goes onto the cymbal stand, those are very easy to take out. If it's in the actual bell, just about impossible to take out. Don't buy it. I've only seen that once, though. That's rare. And that probably happened when someone dropped something on that cymbal. More common are the edge cracks, of the cymbal. I would also avoid edge cracks. My experience is no matter how much you drill those and file them, they'll spread. But middle edge cracks like this, which are rare, but I've seen them several times, they won't spread if you drill them and file them, and then you could put rivets in there or whatever. They will stop. So edge cracks over time will spread. You can cut out a little bit of a bite out of the cymbal. A bandsaw with a metal blade works really well for this. If you're not comfortable doing that, take it to someone who has a bandsaw, and you can cut that out. Now, it will change the sound of the cymbal. It'll definitely dry it up. It changes the pitch as well, so that's not the best scenario. But I do have one of those cymbals. It sounds pretty good, and it has a bite out of it. And I've seen lots of drummers. Steve Gadd has one, these cymbals, and they sound fine. But again, if you're going to pay thousands of dollars for a cymbal, you might want to avoid that. As far as hi-hats go, the old K hi-hats were amazing, but they did tend to wear out. So by wear out, I mean the lathing on the cymbal will develop this wearing out process. You see how it's shiny there on the edge. And then the bottom too, which should be heavier, by the way, all hi-hat cymbals. And over time, that defined hi-hat chick sound that we're used to will get softer and softer. You could use a bottom cymbal like a newer K that's heavier, or anything that's heavier, and that will help out, because really most of the sound of the hi-hats occurs in the top of the cymbals. Also, when you buy K hi-hats, these were sized weird, funny, so they're not exactly the same, the old ones especially, diameter. So you'll find that they'll be a little smaller. Don't let that scare you away. In a lot of ways, that helps with the definition of the chick and less airlocks. This bottom cymbal is 3/16 larger than the top cymbal. I have about 7 of these 13 to 14 inch old K Zildjians, and I mix them and match them at different times. But these cymbals are beautiful for playing like this. So they're very dirty. They're nasty, And again, never annoying. A great choice for Brazilian music, because it's like a dark pandero, you're playing. It's just a great sound. But they are not very loud, which makes it great for playing softer jazz gigs. I normally don't mic hi-hats when I record, but sometimes when I'm using these, I'll throw a mic on them. So yeah, these are old K from the 50s again, old K hi-hats. So now let's get to sticks on Ks. That's a big thing. So the stick I use is a stick that Vic Firth has made for me for about 30 years, which I love, and I developed this with them. because I had these Ks and couldn't find anything that I felt, to me anyway, sounded good on these particular cymbals. Remember, all Ks sound completely different. So these particular cymbals, I was using an SD9, which is what this is, for a long time. It's got an elongated bead, great weight, a little bit on the heavy side. And as you hear there, it creates quite the spread on the cymbal. As opposed to the stick I use, which has a smaller bead. Here's the SD9. And here's the stick I use. So one thing about these old Ks, a lot of times they weren't made in a uniform manner. So this cymbal has 3 different sounds from dry to wet, which is useful. As long as you know where your favorite spot is and you can get to it. One thing you could do is clamp down just slightly, use a felt on top, that will keep it from moving, okay? So that's the difference. That's SD9, smaller tip. So the smaller the tip, the more articulate the sound, okay, in general. Also, the heavier the stick, the lower the pitch. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. That's because of the weight, you're getting more fundamental tone out of the cymbal. For instance, here's a Peter Erskine stick, which I like very much for certain things, but it's got a very small tip, but it's very light. And this stick sounds really good on old Ks as well, but if you listen to this, it's slightly, that's the stick I use, it's slightly more lows. I don't know if you can, if that's coming through on YouTube, but it's slightly lower in pitch. So, but sometimes it's desirable. And by the way, I use several different sticks depending on what I'm doing, but mostly I use this one stick that Vic Firth has made for me. Another kind of stick that you could use that sounds good on Ks is like a 7A with a diamond tip. That's a tip that tapers down. That's a really nice combination of spread and articulation. It does tend to get a little more hum out of this cymbal for whatever reason. And finally, a nylon tip stick is a great tool to have in your bag. Sometimes if you're doing a session and the engineer, whoever you're doing it, is not used to recording jazz, they might, you know, the cymbals might sound a little funny or whatever. I always carry a lot of different sticks so I can EQ my sound that way. And I always ask the engineer to not EQ the cymbals. I own my own studio, of course, and I do most of my recording here, and I don't use any equalization ever on cymbals. I think it just makes them sound terrible. Instead, I use the right cymbals and the right sticks. So a nylon tip will give you a little bit of a higher, more transparent sound. Very articulate because it's not wood, it's a nylon tip, so it's going to be a harder material than obviously maple is. And then different kinds of wood, also hickory, which is harder than maple, will give you more articulate, more weight. But my favorite combination is a maple stick with a small bead. So that I use my stick, but an SD9 if you want more of a spread works. The Peter Erskine sticks sound okay, a little small. And, you know, it doesn't have to be a particular manufacturer, although I'm a Vic Firth endorsee, but the tip is what's important. So it's more of an elongated, slightly round tip is the key, with some weight to the shaft, not too light. And that gives you a great combination on the old Ks of articulation and a dark wash, which is what you want. Also, these Ks are really beautiful for cymbal rolls. These mallets are a little hard, but you can really hear how it just, you don't hear much. Even though I'm using, these are very hard, they're almost xylophone hard mallets. I chose these on purpose to show you that on a K, even though you hear a little initial attack, it's wonderful because you can use almost a pair of drumsticks like this and not get the articulation that you would normally out of a regular cymbal, which is great. The ends of brushes, the rubber part, works great on cymbals. It's just, it's a beautiful sound. So those are really pluses about using these for playing jazz. So now I'm just going to play a little for you, different, not long, but different styles, different tempos, so you can hear some of these cymbals. So there you have it, the old Ks. When you're buying them, make sure that you can either return them if you're ordering them or buying them on eBay, or go to the source and play them. That's what you need to look out for. Thanks so much. Thanks for listening. Take care.